When I'm working on a brand strategy, I end up asking some weird questions. One of them actually is, how weird should a client's brand be? What I'm talking about is differentiation. You probably already are really familiar with this idea that in the vast sea of competitors, you need your brand to stand out in some way. Unfortunately, it's just not always clear what that actually means in practice, especially in creative applications. If you just try to make your brand as different as possible, there's a good chance that your brand just ends up weird. On the other hand, in the absence of a clear positioning strategy, it can be really tempting to go with the most familiar and sometimes the most boring creative choices. I'd like to share a tool that I developed to help my clients and you to find the right balance of weirdness and to stand out in the right way. It's called the Novelty Sweet Spot. Your brain is hardwired to focus on things that are new or surprising. That's why you notice it when someone moves your stapler from one side of your desk to the other. But it's not just that you notice. Novelty also reinforces memorability. It makes things stick. So if you try to remember something that happened when you were 8 years old, probably whatever comes to mind wasn't just another ordinary day, because that stuff just gets forgotten. You want your brand to be noticed, you want it to be remembered, and novelty gets you both. So the question is, why not just turn novelty up to 11 and you can just force everyone to notice and remember your brand? Too much novelty or forced novelty that's not really pointing to anything real makes us feel suspicious or even afraid. If you were to think of novelty as a supplement for your brand, the side effect of taking too much is that feeling of suspicion. Before we find the sweet spot for your brand, we need to map out a spectrum of novelty. On one side, you would have choices that are so expected that they basically are invisible. This might be picking blue for a bank logo or putting an ampersand in a name for a coffee shop aimed at millennials. Unfortunately, this is also the kind of choice that's easiest to get a group of people to agree on because it feels most comfortable. On the other end of the spectrum would be choices that are either too different or maybe they're just different for the wrong reasons. An example I like for this is Twitter changing their name to X. The reason is that raised alarm at a moment when alarm was already raised. Right in the middle, we have choices that are memorable. So this could be Taco Bell choosing purple rather than the more common red, or Twitter being called Twitter to start with. And then we can connect the spectrum with a couple transitional zones. So from left to right, we have these different levels of novelty: invisible, noticeable, memorable, provocative, alarming. Most of the time, a novelty sweet spot is going to be in the middle of the spectrum, but not always. If you want to find your brand's novelty sweet spot, you have to consider two very important things: your industry and your audience. If your industry is one that's really built on trust, like banking or gastroenterology, you're going to want to lean more on the comfortable side. You can't be boring because differentiation still applies, but you really need people to feel trusting. On the other hand, if you're a brand that's in entertainment or something along those lines, you might actually be rewarded for being more provocative. Even within the same industry, what feels novel is going to be relative to your audience's expectations and prior experiences. So an example of this would be Liquid Death. As a water brand, it seems alarming, but for a beer drinker who's used to beer brands and they're just having an NA day, it feels maybe just barely provocative. This level of analysis where you're combining the balance of novelty with the overlay of your industry and audience is the kind of perspective that you need to make smarter creative choices for your brand. If you feel like there's some room for improvement in your brand, or you just want an expert opinion, my agency Referent specializes in assessing and, when needed, evolving brands to help them build value. I hope you found this thought-provoking and helpful. Thanks for watching, and stay weird, but not too weird.